You know, I gotta say, it was like really clever marketing on their part to brand this movie as unrated when it's not. Like, seriously, I was sitting there in the theater and I see the title pop up and it says unrated, and I was like, whoa, how did they get away with this? Because you can almost never show unrated movies in a mainstream movie theater. And then I check afterwards and I see, oh, it's not actually unrated. They just called it that. It's really an R. So, they fooled me. They fooled me. I'm sure they're gonna fool a bunch of other viewers. It's good marketing. I gotta respect it. Hey everyone, I'm Ben, your underground conductor, and welcome to Underground Cinema. Now I gotta say, this should be a fun review for me, because this week I'm going to be talking about the new horror comedy remake, The Toxic Avenger. You know, it's funny. Thinking about it, I'm pretty sure this is like the first brand new movie I've reviewed since last year. I think the last new movie I talked about was Hellboy the Crooked Man, when that came out like last October. So this should be a nice change of pace. Anyway, as mentioned, The Toxic Avenger is a remake. It's a remake of an older B movie from 1984 called The Toxic Avenger. And The Toxic Avenger as a film is quite interesting because despite being a trashy B-movie, it's surprisingly more influential than a lot of people would expect it to be. I mean, just like a lot of other B-movies, The Toxic Avenger wasn't necessarily a big hit when it came out, but it pretty quickly developed a cult following, and as a result, the studio that made it, Troma Entertainment, was able to find pretty solid footing in the low-budget film realm. Like, seriously, this movie developing the popularity that it did allowed Troma Entertainment to branch out and make more movies that then became staples of their brand. Movies like Class of Nukem High, Sergeant Kabuki Man, NYPD, Frankenhooker, or Tromeo and Juliet. And interesting trivia, James Gunn's first writing credit was on Tromeo and Juliet. And not only that, but one of his earliest acting credits was in The Toxic Avenger 4. So at the end of the day, you really need to give The Toxic Avenger credit, because not only did it breathe life into this small studio making B-movies, but you can also say that it was the catalyst for the incredibly successful career that James Gunn has now. But I am talking a little too much about the old, so let's discuss the new Toxic Avenger. So apparently the idea of making a Toxic Avenger remake had been kicked around since like the early 2010s. Initially, they wanted Arnold Schwarzenegger to come in and play the Toxic Avenger, which would have been amazing, but he unfortunately had to turn it down to do Terminator Genisys, which is a much worse movie. The project was stuck in limbo for a while, but then a young filmmaker named Macon Blair came along. Blair is a massive fan of Troma Entertainment. Apparently he's seen every single Troma film and TV show, and what he did is that he penned a script for this Toxic Avenger movie. And the script wildly impressed Lloyd Kaufman, the president of Troma Entertainment and director of the original Toxic Avenger. So they went ahead and casted the film, shot it, and then cut it together and started screening it at smaller festivals and private screenings. And despite relatively popular reviews, no distributor would pick up the movie. Like, this version of The Toxic Avenger was apparently finished 2 years ago in 2023, but no one wanted to pick it up to distribute it. And apparently one producer who was asked to pick up the movie went as far as saying that the film was unreleasable. And I remember hearing that a couple years ago, and I just thought to myself, man, I want to see that movie. So here we are now in the year of our Lord 2025, and The Toxic Avenger is in theaters. So, how did the movie turn out? Well, I never really do this, but for once, I'll give a spoiler warning going into this, because I want people to see this movie. Like, you should go and see this movie. I had a great time with it. But, fair warning, I'm going to get into it. So when The Toxic Avenger begins, we meet our main character, Winston, played by Peter Dinklage. And the character of Winston is a single stepdad living in the town of Troma Ville, taking care of his dead girlfriend's son, who is the autistic kid from Shane Black's The Predator. And in this movie, the autistic kid happens to attend Nukem High, which is great. Anyway, ever since his girlfriend died, Winston has done his best to keep this small family together, and he spends his days slaving away as a janitor in a pollution factory that is run by Kevin Bacon, who currently is in a lot of trouble because apparently the health supplements that he sells has been giving people terminal illnesses. Which, yeah, that's weird. That definitely doesn't happen in real life. Anyway, while we're on the subject of terminal illnesses, Winston is feeling off one day and goes to see his doctor, and his doctor goes on to tell him that he has an undefined brain illness. The condition appears to be terminal, but apparently there's a treatment for it. Unfortunately, though, Winston's company insurance is refusing to pay for the treatment. Apparently, Luigi Mangione wasn't popping heads when this movie was made, so unfortunately Winston is As a last-ditch effort, though, he goes to see his boss, Kevin Bacon, and begs him for his help. Unfortunately, though, Kevin Bacon is a vile bastard. And goes on to dismiss Winston as just a sad little man. Winston, enraged by this, then goes on to rob his boss. But during the robbery, things go awry as he accidentally runs into the film's token hot black chick, who is also being chased, coincidentally, by Kevin Bacon, as well as Kevin Bacon's brother, Frodo Baggins, from all 5 seasons of the hit Fox show Gotham. Anyway, the token hot black chick is able to escape, but unfortunately Winston ends up getting shot by the insane Clown Village people, and they end up dumping his body into some nuclear waste. But instead of dying, Winston gets mutated and becomes the Toxic Avenger. Obviously, at this point, his character has been horribly mutilated, and his appearance scares his stepson. So, after suffering from this accident, he decides that he should devote himself to doing the most good, that way he can be someone that his stepson is proud of. So what he does is reenact one of the best scenes from the original Toxic Avenger, where he goes to kill a bunch of incel terrorists who are mad because Burger King has become Burger Queen. I wish I was joking. Anyway, unsurprisingly, the Toxic Avenger is able to mop up all of the incel filth, save the hostages who were stuck at Burger Queen, and becomes a local hero. But, unsurprisingly, the attention that he's gotten from this event has actually attracted the interest of Kevin Bacon, who is able to recognize that this Toxic Avenger is Winston, and he thinks that if he takes Winston to experiment on him, he can then extract the mutagen that turned Winston into the Toxic Avenger. That way he can give himself a bigger penis. Okay, that one's actually a joke. He's doing it that way he can, get his business back on track and get the mobsters off his back. But, I mean, they do call him 5-inch bozo in this movie, so... Anyway, to lure the Toxic Avenger to him, Kevin Bacon commands his brother, Frodo Baggins, to kidnap Winston's stepson. And after this happens, Winston then teams up with the token hot black chick to go save his stepson. But unfortunately, the both of them get captured, and Winston gets his blood extracted. And after a little bit of experimentation, Kevin Bacon then drinks the blood and becomes Krampus. For some reason. In any case, though, eventually Winston is able to break free, and he goes to rescue his stepson. But unfortunately, the shed that his stepson is in blows up. Enraged by this terrible tragedy, Winston then goes to face off against Krampus Bacon, and the two of them fight until Krampus Bacon is eventually defeated. Now, with the villain out of the story, things are looking pretty good, but Winston isn't satisfied. He's been horribly mutilated, and his stepson is gone. Or so he thinks. As apparently, Frodo Baggins' heart got the better of him, and he decides to actually go and save the precious little boy. You know, thinking about it, he actually does look more like Gollum than Penguin in this movie. Anyway, all seems good, but then Winston gets stabbed by Krampus Bacon's girlfriend, and all of them blow up. But everything is fine because Winston wakes up in the hospital a little later. And then he hears from his doctor that apparently his terminal vague brain illness has been cured by the mutation that he got. So that's great. Winston then reunites with his stepson, watches his stepson do the dance scene from Napoleon Dynamite, and then the movie just wraps up with a wholesome shot of Winston looking like a proud father. And yeah, that's the Toxic Avenger. A fun ride all the way through, with tons of different references to different Troma films. There's even a cameo from Lloyd Kaufman in this movie, who of course directed the original Toxic Avenger. Funny of him showing up in a Stan Lee style cameo, considering that he was actually very good friends with Stan Lee. But in any case, I genuinely had a great time watching this movie. It just felt like a breath of fresh air to me. And despite being pretty schlocky and cheesy, the movie also has an odd amount of artistry attached to it. Obviously, the film has a lot of A-list actors in it for, like, no reason, and they all do great work. Like, Kevin Bacon is amazing as always. Elijah Wood was pretty fun, even though he's not super integral to the story. Jacob Tremblay was great as Winston's son, which is unsurprising considering that as a 9-year-old, Jacob Tremblay won like 5 or 6 awards for his performance in the movie Room. But the standout, 100%, is Peter Dinklage, who just brings a solid emotional core to this story, as his character is just a struggling single stepdad. Not even a single dad, a single stepdad, watching over a kid that isn't even his. But you can also tell, based on Dinklage's performance, that the reason he's watching over this kid isn't because of some obligation that he feels to his dead girlfriend. He sees this kid as his own. And you can feel the concern that he has throughout the film, especially after he becomes the Toxic Avenger. And that also brings me to the unsung hero of this movie, Luisa Guerrero, who is the woman who stands in as the Toxic Avenger, which I did not realize until after I saw the movie, even though it's pretty obvious. I mean, even though the Toxic Avenger isn't tall, he is slightly taller than Peter Dinklage, so obviously they will have gotten a stand-in model for that. But Guerrero does a phenomenal job with both her physical performance and the lip sync as the Toxic Avenger, as I genuinely could not tell that that was not Peter Dinklage. Like, she just nailed everything. And she, as well as Dinklage, should both be praised for the work that they put into this movie. Of course, pivoting back to the father-son story, I also adore the narrative that they ran through this movie, as it's surprisingly heartfelt. I mean, maybe it's biased because we've gotten so many movies in the last 10 years about sad, deadbeat dads whose kids hate them, but it's just so incredibly refreshing to see a man who's not even a biological father but a stepfather look after this kid that he has no obligation to. And their relationship has a fair amount of nuance between them, because it would have been super easy in a situation like this to write the child character as being resentful of his stepfather. But no, like, while there's tension between the two of them, you can tell that the tension isn't rooted in resentment. The tension really just comes as a result of the tragedy that the both of them suffered, and their inability to connect with each other. Dinklage's character Winston is frustrated because he's not sure exactly how to connect with his stepson after the death of his stepson's mother. Meanwhile, the stepson Wade is frustrated with Winston because instead of emotionally coping with him and having the two of them mourn together, Winston instead opted to send Wade to a string of child psychologists. It's a realistic conflict that does great work of highlighting how the two of them love each other but don't know how to express that, which, if you ask me, is much more interesting than just having a narrative where, oh, I hate you because you're not my real dad. Like, I feel like this movie is all the better for doing that. Of course, no one goes to see a movie called The Toxic Avenger for an admittedly beautiful story about a father-son conflict. You go to see it for the blood, guts, and gore. And this movie has it plentifully, as every single action scene in this movie is punctuated with so much blood and so much body horror. It is phenomenal. And it's just so unbelievably gory in a way that I haven't seen in a while. Like, thinking back on it, I think the last non-slasher movie I saw that had this much gore was Hobo with a Shotgun. Like, this movie is just so gleefully bloody, and it's just so fun to see, and it's just so gross, and I love it, because that is what the Toxic Avengers should be. And the fact that you can tell that the people who made this movie actually gave a really helps to elevate the film, and that's also reflected in the effects that you see in the movie. Not just the blood and gore, but the actual practical effects that they use for the Toxic Avenger. It looks so incredibly good, as he's just a sickly guy walking around, and you think to yourself, oh, this dude's going to get, like, run over or shot at any point because people will think he's a monster. Or worse yet, he'll just drop dead from all the radiation. Like, he just looks so painfully disgusting. There's even a couple moments in the movie where his eye pops out, his big eye, and it looks so good. Don't get me wrong, there are a couple small effects that don't necessarily hold up, but it's barely noticeable. And honestly, the odd bad effect here and there just sort of adds to the B-movie aesthetic that this film is aiming for. But yeah, The Toxic Avenger is just an incredible remake. But that being said, it is still a remake. And even though this film can stand on its own, and I think it does a great job standing on its own, there are a couple pitfalls it has if you compare it to the original. And I think that stems primarily from how stuffed the plot is in this movie and the overall tone of this film compared to the original. So, the original Toxic Avenger is the definition of a trashy B-movie. It is meant to be deliberately disgusting and distasteful. And almost no character in that film is supposed to be likable, including the main character, the Toxic Avenger. In the original Toxic Avenger, the title character is a janitor named Melvin, who is a total pervert. Like, the dude is just an overtly gross nerd who oogles hot girls all day. Like, he's a putz. But despite his character's shortcomings, you do side with him in the movie by default, because everyone else in Troma Ville is just so much worse than him. Like, the average person in Troma Ville goes out on the road at night to run over disabled kids and black people for fun. That's not a joke. Like, the film is deliberately distasteful. But when the Toxic Avenger finally experiences his accident, he starts taking revenge on all the people who wronged him, and he starts cleaning up this horribly filthy city of Troma Ville. But like I said, you kind of just root for the character of Melvin by default because he is a loser. He's not a good person, he's just a loser, so you're playing off the underdog complex for that. Now you take that sentiment and you compare it to this new Toxic Avenger, which is about a struggling single stepdad. It doesn't quite match up. And to be fair, if you're asking me which one I think is better, I think the new one is a more emotionally effective film. And even Lloyd Kaufman himself acknowledged that he thought the script for this movie was better than his. But I do feel like this film does play it a little too straight and is a little too sincere for what you'd expect from this intellectual property. And I know that sounds ridiculous considering how gory this movie is, but there should be a stronger sense of irreverence, like what the original movie has. And also, if you're comparing the two films, I do think that the original Toxic Avenger does have a slightly tighter plot than this one. Like, this version of the Toxic Avenger has sort of 3 separate storylines that converge together, and it's not necessarily too clean. Like, you have the storyline of Kevin Bacon's character and how he's sort of beholden to the mob because his business is failing. Then you have the journalist character, you know, the token hot black chick, who is trying to out Kevin Bacon's company for all the illness that his company has caused to the people of Troma Ville, and how much the company has also polluted the local environment. And then you have the story of Winston, who's just an innocent bystander who comes across these incredible abilities and uses them to clean up Troma Ville. Like, the plot comes together mostly effectively, but it's a little too much. And there's certain elements of the narrative that overflow. You know, like I mentioned earlier, Elijah Wood's character is kind of inconsequential to the story. He doesn't necessarily have to be in the movie. And the same thing goes for his musician enforcers, whose names I don't remember. They just looked like a cross between the Insane Clown Posse and the Village People. Like, those characters don't necessarily need to be in the movie. Like, they're good set dressing for the world. They help contextualize how awful Troma Ville can be, but they're a little tacked on. And then there's also the social commentary that exists in this version of the Toxic Avenger. Like, the most substantial commentary that you get in the original film is about the mayor's corruption, which is incredibly generic. Meanwhile, this film pokes fun at incels, it makes fun of far-right newscasters, it even makes fun of climate change. And it feels a little on the nose, and considering that we've been inundated with so much of that exact commentary over the last, 10-15 years, it makes it a little grating. Like, under normal circumstances, I'd roll my eyes over that sort of commentary. But, that being said, those jokes are some of the only things in the movie that they don't play straight. Like I said, this version of the Toxic Avenger is a mostly sincere story, but when it gets to moments where they touch on commentary, they just turn it into a joke, which I do appreciate, actually. So, you know, you win some, you lose some. Meanwhile, the original Toxic Avenger has a little bit of a tighter plot, because the first third of the movie almost exclusively centers around Melvin's character, leading up to him becoming the Toxic Avenger. And then over the course of the film, he sort of stumbles upon a political conspiracy being orchestrated by the mayor of Troma Ville, You know, the movie sort of plays off the reluctant hero archetype. Like, Melvin didn't go out actively looking to fight the mayor and his goons. You know, he was just trying to do the right thing with the powers that he got and clean up Troma Ville by wiping out all the people who were violent or making the city worse. And it just so happens that a few of those people worked for the mayor. So, in that sense, I think the original film has a stronger story. And also, to be fair, I'm biased because when it comes to storytelling, I prefer concise plot lines as opposed to multiple stories that converge. Because a lot of the time, it isn't super well done. I think it's mostly done well in this version of the story, and like I said, I love the emotional core of this film. But even though I would say that this film is overall better, there's still a couple shortcomings with it if you are directly comparing it to the original, if that makes sense. But still, regardless of how this film stacks up to the original, The Toxic Avenger is just a great movie. And if you're interested in supporting a movie that actively spits in the face of how overly sanitized and formulaic Hollywood has become, this is the movie that does that. It's hilarious, it's heartfelt, and it's bloody as hell. And at the end of the day, that's all I could really ask for from a movie like this. So if you're interested in checking out the new Toxic Avenger, I'd sincerely recommend it. At time of recording, it is the opening weekend of the movie. Just make sure not to trip over a vat of nuclear waste on your way to the theater. But yeah, that was my review of the Toxic Avenger. I think this actually might be my shortest review in a while. I hope you all enjoyed it. Please feel free to subscribe if you're feeling generous. You can also follow me on Instagram or Letterboxd if you want to hear more of my film takes. Make sure you remember to stay toxic. And I will see you later.